What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I have a theory. Shang-Chi, Ms. Marvel, all that kind of stuff, and I feel like it all points to the idea of Captain Universe. Now, I know that's going to sound crazy, but bear with me here for a second, and I think the evidence actually lean towards this idea, but only if you know where to look, because we know the MCU is very big on drawing on like super obscure things in order to put pieces together for more familiar things. So let's talk about the whole thing with like the quantum realm. Let's talk about that for a second. So when it comes to the quantum realm, what is this in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? In the MCU, the quantum realm is basically their version of the microverse from Marvel Comics. Why? Because Marvel can't use the microverse. They don't have the rights to it. And so basically the MCU had to create its own thing. But the quantum realm is, by all standards of measurement, a stand-in. There are differences, like the microverse, for example, in Marvel Comics is a microscopic universe. It has galaxies and stars and planets and people, citizens, the whole nine yards, kingdoms, and so on and so forth. But it is its own place. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we've seen precious little of the quantum realm, but what we have seen indicates that like there may be entire cultures and civilizations and galaxies and stuff that exist out there. We don't know how far-reaching it is. We don't know exactly how deep the microverse goes. The quantum realm goes. I'm sure we'll find out as time goes on. As far as I'm aware, I think it's still a theory the TVA existed in the microverse or the quantum realm. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case. Honestly, I haven't really looked into it too much since Loki ended. But the thing about this is that these have striking similarities. One of the big questions that a lot of people find themselves asking is, how is it that Janet Van Dyne, existing in the quantum realm for as long as she did, became as powerful as she was? And a lot of people are just kind of like, well, that's just the nature of the quantum realm, right? It's just a source of immense power. And that's true to a degree, but there is potentially a little more to it than that. And that's the form of, or at least the object or the thing that we know as the enigma force in Marvel Comics. So while it has kind of changed more recently regarding like Null the symbiote god and that kind of stuff, the enigma force, we don't really know its definitive origin. We don't know exactly where it came from. The earliest thing that we know in terms of the history of the Enigma Force came from Marvel Preview number 4 in 1975 by Bill Mantlo and Ed Hannigan. And what we ended up finding out is that at some point in the distant future, you had a guy named Prince Wayfinder, and that his people were quite literally being hunted down and killed by a group called the World Demons. In an effort to escape their own destruction, they escaped that future and traveled to the past about 65 million years before the modern day. And what Prince Wayfinder did is, using the Enigma Force, which was channeled through an object called the Sword and the Star, he basically created the microverse. And that allowed his people to essentially hide away, right? To hide away inside this tiny little itty-bitty microscopic universe, and they just stayed there ever since. Now, in terms of where the Enigma Force came from, we're not entirely sure. Marvel's never really explained it. The only real reference we have is that the Enigma Force basically permeates and exists as what's essentially holding the microverse together, but the Enigma Force can bond itself to a person, and that person will become Captain Universe, and in doing so are basically a protector of the universe itself. When the Enigma Force bonds to a person, it's just arbitrary. It's always only ever based on a story, different things like that, so the power they possess is relative to go along with that. So like if you go and you read Acts of Vengeance, Spider-Man became Captain Universe, he had the Enigma Force. The most incredible thing we saw him do was like punch the Incredible Hulk into the atmosphere, and like that was it. Right? It wasn't anything crazy. It wasn't like he altered reality on a universal scale. But if you go and you read the events of like Spider-Verse, for example, you end up learning there's an alternate reality out there where Peter never lost the Enigma Force and he became godly in terms of his powers. So the Enigma Force can do a lot. It's just contextual based on the story. If you go and you read Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, for example, oh my God, I love that story. You go and you read that story, like you got Captain Universe in that story. And while the power that we were shown, or at least the power that she was stated to have had, was astronomical, she couldn't stop the collapse of the multiverse. So literally her role in there was more ceremonial than anything else. But the thing about this is that when it comes to the Enigma Force itself, you look at Janet Van Dyne, she was really, really powerful. She was wildly capable in terms of what it was that she could do. But the thing to also bear in mind is we have to ask the question, how does this connect to like Shang-Chi and Ms. Marvel and that kind of thing? Well, if in the comics, the Enigma Force could be channeled through the Sword and the Star, then what's to say the Enigma Force can't be channeled through the 10 rings of Shang-Chi and the bracelet of Ms. Marvel? We know they're incredibly old. We know from the post-credits scene of Shang-Chi, even though it doesn't necessarily speak to the bracelet of Kamala Khan, we know that like the rings themselves, from what we were told, are incredibly old, right? Just extremely old. We're not given a particular time, but we know they're at least older than a few thousand years because that's when the father of Shang-Chi got his hands on them, right? We also know the rings themselves are essentially sentient, that in that essence, in the post-credit scene, we learned that it wasn't until Shang-Chi got the rings that suddenly the beacon started going off. That's literally what Wong says, right? As soon as you put the rings on, a beacon activated and started sending a signal somewhere. So what this seems to indicate is only certain people were able to use the rings, or able to activate this beacon by using the rings. Whether it was anybody besides Shang-Chi, we don't know, right? The circumstance just gave us Shang-Chi, and that was basically it. And so what it does is it hits at this idea that the rings did not want to send that beacon out until the right person was using them. At the same time, you look at Kamala Khan, while this bracelet was passed down from seemingly one generation to the next, it would explain why there's never been any explanation of this bracelet being used by anybody except for her. Now, we're only one episode in. There hasn't been a lot of information given to us aside from the fact that like the bracelet can do some stuff, so maybe that information will be forthcoming later on. But it's not outside the realm of possibility that those two things came from the quantum realm. We don't know where the beacon is being sent. There's nothing to indicate that a beacon is being sent anywhere into outside the universe itself. We're not given an answer, right? Shang-Chi's like, where's the beacon being sent to, right? And ultimately Carol Danvers takes off. But we know from like Carol Danvers and from Bruce Banner and all of them, there's nothing about those rings that indicate that they come from anywhere recognizable. They don't match any form of alien technology that exists in space. They don't match any form of technology that exists on Earth. They don't match anything in the Magical Codex as far as the Sorcerer Supreme is aware. They're literally just enigma objects, right? They're enigmatic. We know nothing about them. What better way to have an object that channels the Enigma Force than an object that is in itself enigmatic? Now, we may end up getting, an explanation later on down the line, but when you look at the bracelet of Kamala Khan and you look at the 10 rings of Shang-Chi, they look almost exactly alike in terms of how they appear, the material that they're made of, as well as the energy they emanate when they're being used. So the question here is, do they really come from the quantum realm? And if they do, using just Marvel comic logic and looking at the sword and the star, there's no reason to believe that these are objects that cannot channel a person or allow a person the ability to channel the Enigma Force, to literally channel it and use it. Now, the question has to be asked here, if that's the case, then was it possible multiple people were using them? And I think the answer to that question is no. I think at one point in time, they belong to one person. Now, it's possible they belong to multiple people. In Marvel Comics, the Enigma Force at one point in time did spread its power among multiple people and then eventually stopped and started, basically channeling its power into a singular person. But while this might sound crazy, I want to propose this idea here because it really is kind of teased in the Eternals movie where you have the Unimind, right? Like multiple people merging themselves into a singular mind or using that mind to achieve a variety of different effects. Not outside that realm of possibility when it comes to the Enigma Force in Captain Universe. That happened in Micronauts number 35 back in 1981, where basically the sword and the star was destroyed. But what happened is you had a guy named Arcturus Ran who was merged with Dr. Stephen Strange and turned into Captain Universe. So there's precedent to merge two people or more into a singular entity, and that person becomes Captain Universe. So that's entirely possible here. Like what you're looking at is the potential build up to a situation where you have basically Shang-Chi and you've got Kamala Khan and those guys all channeling the power of the Enigma Force in different ways, or they would all be merged into a singular being using the Enigma Force, and like the different aspects of them would be used in different ways, right? It's entirely possible that like the rings are not actually bracelets, they're legitimately rings. And when Captain Universe manifests, maybe the rings shrink down and just end up on his individual fingers. I mean, it would look a little weird to see a Captain Universe running around, looks like he's just balling out, right? Like literally just rings, gold, got like a gold chain around its neck. But I don't think this is the last of these artifacts that we're going to see. I think we're going to see more of these artifacts, right? More of these things kind of circulating around. But I do think there's room here to make a credible argument that what Kamala Khan is doing and what Shang-Chi is doing, and other people will most likely be doing as well, is basically channeling the Enigma force. It's channeling this source of energy from the quantum realm, but not knowing it. The real way, I think the real time when we'll get this answer, the actual way we'll get this answer, will likely be in Ant-Man 3 Quantumania. And at the very least, if Janet Van Dyne lays her hands or lays her eyes on these artifacts that are used by Shang-Chi and Kamala Khan, and just being like, I recognize that. That's from the quantum realm. You're channeling the power of the Enigma force. I think that's possible. I think it's entirely possible that that's what we're looking at. But again, I don't know. We won't know for sure until some future explanation is given. This is really just a theory on my part. But let me know what you guys think. Right? Do you guys think that we're looking at a situation where, in effect, they're channeling the Enigma force, and at some future point in time, due to some massive conflict, possibly the fight against Kang the Conqueror, that they'll be merged together into what's basically Captain Universe, in the same way the Eternals merge into the Unimind? Let me know what you guys think. I'm very curious about that. But anyway, guys, we're going to bring this to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.